Welcome everyone to our webinar today my name is Philip Louv with XPOsoft, and I'm here with Nancy Castle with CQAA. Nancy, why don't you introduce yourself and your organization? It's great to work with you, but just in case people don't know who CQAA is, I'll let you do your thing.
Okay, sounds great. Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody can hear me okay? I'm Nancy Castle. I'm president of the Chicago Quality Assurance Association, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. This is really our first webinar that we're doing later on in the day. Typically, we have lunchtime webinars, but we needed to accommodate our speaker schedule. And it's good to know that we have a really great turnout today, even though it's in the afternoon. We're going to continue to be virtual with our CQAA events through this year. And the good part of it, it allows us to reach out to speakers beyond those who live in the Chicagoland area. In addition to webinars, we will also try a few virtual meetups, because I think the one thing that has happened that we are missing that networking aspect that CQA always had when we could get together in person. And so last year we tried a virtual meetup. It went pretty well in November, and we'll add another one into our upcoming agenda, because it does give people the opportunity to interact. If you're interested in giving a webinar or even facilitating a meetup this year on a topic that you are passionate about, please contact us and just send an email to info@cqaa.org. That's info@cqaa.org. So let's look ahead to the next couple months of what your CQAA board has planned for you. For April, on April 21st, we are having Mike Kaufman from Kaufman Consulting, who's going to be talking about emotional intelligence and how it affects our work. Now, this doesn't sound like a typical testing topic, but we like to bring you a variety of interesting topics because we all do work, and there's an aspect of emotional intelligence and how it's affecting all of us. So be sure to attend that webinar. Then on May 19th, we have Joe Jarzambek from Synopsys, and he's going to be talking about testing for privacy and data protection. Joe has given keynote presentations at conferences. He used to work for the Department of Homeland Security, and he's kind of our go-to person when it comes to insights regarding security and privacy. And we're very pleased to have Joe speak to us in May on this very important topic. Information about these upcoming webinars will be posted on the CQAA website. We have the April webinar posted. You can go ahead and register for that if you haven't. We're working on getting the May webinar announced. So at this time, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Philip Louv, which I have known for quite a few years because he is a speaker that makes his rounds at many of the conferences, and I got to know him through the Quest conferences. Phil is the CEO of XPOsoft, software QA and software testing services that his company provides to their clients to deliver products to the market faster and with higher quality. As a corporate executive, development manager, product manager, and software engineer, Philip has managed teams to tackle broken processes, develop solutions to difficult problems, and coach others. He leverages his academic background in operations research and computer science, as well as his hands-on experience he's had in a variety of different roles. During this webinar, your microphones are muted. I hope Philip is doing that in order to avoid any background noises that may occur. If you need any technical assistance, please use the chat to communicate the problem, and someone will be helping you with it. Now, in order to have enough time to finish all the content that Phil has for us, we ask you to, throughout the webinar, submit your questions through the chat. And then at the end, we've allowed plenty of time for Q&A, and Phil will be addressing your questions. We will be posting the slides to this webinar to our CQAA website, as we always do. In the repository section, we have speaker presentations going back to, I think, about 2010 on a variety of different topics. Give us a couple days to get the slides posted out there because CQAA is a voluntary organization and we depend on our volunteers to get the work done on our website. So at this time, sit back and enjoy today's webinar. Phil?
Well, great. Thanks for the introduction, Nancy. Today's webinar is Agile Metrics to Boost Quality Improvement. And I think that one of the things that a lot of folks talk about is that, because of the Agile and the way that it is so interactive and so many of the Agile principles don't really loan themselves to measurement. And so I'd like to talk about some concepts that I've been working on with our clients in actually measuring parts of Agile other than defects and of course other than velocity that can help you to improve your quality. And so one of the analogies I like to use is blood markers and using blood markers to understand your health prior to having a problem when you go to the doctor. So let's get into the good stuff here. Let's see. So I guess Nancy did all this, so I don't really need to go over it in terms of who we are and who CQAA is.
Exactly. Yep.
This is our first stand-up meeting. So as Nancy said, you guys are muted, but we can open things up later on for questions. What you'll learn today, the power of three. So I'm going to talk about some of the things within Agile, the steps within Agile where you can measure what you should be looking at besides defects, and some other ways to look at some of the metrics that you may have already been looking at, some other ways to examine them and grasp some insights from. Nancy already introduced me. I'd like to introduce my partner Cheney here. Cheney is a JIRA expert, so he was able to help me in understanding some of the deeper capabilities of JIRA that a lot of us don't really get into. And so he's here just in case we want to ask some deeper JIRA questions. So the three biggest killers, what are they? The three biggest killers in the United States are cardiovascular disease and neurodegeneration, of course, and then there's cancer. And the thing is that everybody gets these diseases, even centenarians, the older folks that live over 100, but the difference is that they get these later, right? And once you get them, it's too late. And so what I'd like to emphasize here is that, just like in our health, we want to go forward or avoid these diseases before they occur. We want to take measurements on these things, right? So what are the measurements that you can take before you get cancer so that you can understand some of the things that you can prevent cancer? And the same thing with neurodegeneration. And so, a lot of us think of things like weighing ourselves is very easy to do in terms of monitoring our health. We also, a lot of times, may check our blood pressure, right? And then there's also blood tests. And what I've found is that a lot of the doctors out there, when they call themselves preventative, still will not recommend a blood test more than once a year. And I think it's such an easy way to get data about what's going on inside your body for usually less than $100. And I think you should get it more often. I'd like to talk about some of these things. And also, how much do you sleep? Sleep really affects your health. And I've been doing a lot of research on this, and it's really the foundation of things. I've listed here some common blood markers that maybe you're not aware of that lead to these kinds of things. And I just want to emphasize this as a analogy to Agile, where we really think about velocity. Oops, we're too slow, or oops, we didn't complete enough stories, or oops, we have too many defects that escaped. But those are really end results. Those are like cancer. Those are like Alzheimer's. Those are things that happen after the fact. And there are many things that we can do before that. There are many things that we can understand about our process before we get those diseases at the end that end up killing us. And, one of the things I'd like to emphasize also is that we don't want to compare ourselves to anyone else, and that comparisons have actually changed over time. If you look back in the 1960s, the average male weighed 166 pounds, and today the average male is close to 200 pounds in the United States. And so when you go to the doctor, if you're, say, 195 pounds, they may say, oh, you're quite normal. But what does this tell you? This tells you that they're really just reading statistics, and is somebody that is healthier, or somebody that weighs 197 today healthier or average, but really the scale has changed. So what I encourage you to do is to really think about the scale that you're measuring, and not to compare yourselves with anyone else. A lot of people talk about their velocity, and it's really difficult to compare yourself with other teams, even within the same company. And this is just kind of like the analogy that I just mentioned, where sleep, eating, lifestyle, exercise, and eventually you have some problems and it leads you to a doctor visit. And what we're trying to do is avoid these doctor visits where we have these pains in Agile. And so let's work backwards, right? Let's work backwards so that the doctor visit is not a surprise. And so we have our software, and we have a lot of business needs, requirements. Sometimes we have a sponsor or a product owner, and then there's us that end up building the software, and we tend to be very disconnected and very distant from the end user in understanding what their needs are. And it's very easy to see how things could get confused with all of these dotted lines. Nancy, could you look at the question panel in case there's questions as we go along? Because I can't really see it right now because I'm doing my full screen share.
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay, great.
There's no question yet.
Okay. And so the three biggest killers in Agile and software development, I think, are late or incomplete delivery, carrying the analogy forward, poor quality, right? And of course, features that users don't want, don't need, or maybe different. We delivered something different than they thought. And I would say these are the three killers for Agile and software development in general. And so before, we had these blood markers that would help us to predict whether or not we were going to get cancer or things like that. But where are the metrics inside Agile to help us to predict, to understand what our health is before the end result, before we have these problems? And this is a typical Scrum process work cycle here. And as you can see, it's difficult to understand, well, what are the intermediate things that we could look at? Where are the blood markers in Agile? And the problem with looking at some of these things is that we don't know what to measure, as I said. It takes time and effort to collect. So unlike just going into the doctor and having your blood taken and being able to get your blood markers, it takes a little bit more time. And so we want to make sure that each of these measurements is also repeatable. So you want to go to the same lab, right, to get your blood taken. And after we get these results, after we get all these metrics, a lot of folks don't know what to do with the data. So why even collect it from the beginning if you don't have an objective? And there's a lot of folks that talk about GQM. I've given quite a few workshops on GQM in terms of goal quality metric and trying to understand why you're collecting metrics beforehand in order to have a goal to something to do with them. And of course, a lot of folks are afraid that management will use these metrics in the wrong way. And so lots of problems with metrics. This is not necessarily a webinar on alleviating these problems, but to just kind of bring to light some of these issues, and possibly we can try to tackle them as we go along today. So let's look at Agile. These are the part of the Agile manifesto here. And I emphasize this word here, over. I put that in green because I want to stress that over does not mean none, right? So over responding to change, over following a plan does not mean no plan. And individuals and interactions over processes and tools does not mean no process, right? Working software over comprehensive documentation does not mean no documentation. So I think that's important, when you're in your stand-up meetings and people may object to having even test cases. Over is not equal to none, is what I say. You notice I put that box there in gray, and the reason I put it in gray is because there is some gray area. It's not black and white. There is something in between in terms of none and some. So in terms of Agile, where is the quality in Agile, and how can we measure things before we get to the end? How do we measure change? How do we measure interactions and collaboration? And in order to get to the working software that we desire. And so I listed the problems here on the left-hand side that we went over before. And so the solutions are on the right-hand side, and that is really to look at the process that you have in your organization, your Agile process, or whatever process that you're using, and think about the intermediate steps in your process and the work products for those steps. So for Agile, you might have work products such as user stories, right? Acceptance criteria, or acceptance criteria would be, the definition of done, right? That is an acceptance criteria, definition of done for a particular user story or for a release. And then you want to develop measurements or characteristics for those things that your steps in your process. And of course, to get around management and people in terms of pointing fingers, we want to measure the process, not the people. And so I bring this chart up again for looking at a typical project or a typical Agile lifecycle development process. And you can see that, well, some work happens in the sprints, and then at the end, we're supposed to have some working software, right? And so what other parts of the process do you think matter enough to measure? Well, let's look at the beginning and look at some of the intermediate steps to understand what other things we can look at. Well, of course, we look at defects, right? Everybody's used to looking at defects, but there's a lot of different ways you could look at them just besides counting them. We can look at test cases. That's also an intermediate product. We can look at our estimates. That is a product of our work, right? We estimate how long things are going to take, how big things are, how big a task is. Those are the other intermediate work products. User stories are another intermediate work product, right? So what would be the quality? How would you measure whether a user story was good or not, right? So what I'd like you to do is to think about your process and work step by step through them, thinking about your work products. And one of the things I'd like to emphasize is that one work product affects many other work products. So just like I was saying that sleep is really the foundation. Sleep, actually they found that sleep, if you sleep enough, you produce different hormones in your body that cause you to eat differently. And so I don't know if you notice, but if you do an all-nighter, you tend to really love junk food. And the opposite of that really occurs when you sleep enough. You tend to really eat better food. And so the same thing with your intermediate work products affecting downstream other work products in your Agile process. People talk a lot about, oh, it starts with the requirements. If you correct mistakes in requirements, it's much cheaper and blah, blah, blah. But the problem is, how do we look at our requirements to determine whether or not they're good quality, right? And so think about your requirements and think about how you can improve the quality of your requirements that would affect your downstream work products. Now, I listed out a couple of the different work products here that I pointed out in the previous slide. And so maybe you have questions on, or maybe there's other input on other work products that you may have inside your organization that are intermediate before the end, right? I mentioned just these, but you probably have others. And so I want to bring up this key concept here again, that one work product affects the next work product. So we've got user stories, right? They influence the quality of your user stories, influence the quality of your estimates, right? Because if you don't have good user stories, it's really difficult to estimate how long they're going to take to get done. And if you don't have good estimates, then it's really difficult to have good working software, because you'll end up putting forth the incorrect amount of resources and not develop what you thought you could develop, and so on. And of course, at the end, you have defects, which depends on all of these things. And so, think about today, all of the things earlier than defects that we can measure and improve upon, just like, I said, in terms of your health, all the different things that you can measure to avoid the defects at the end. Yeah, so what are the characteristics of each work product that would affect the quality of the overall product or the next work product, right? So that's really important to think about. So we want our work products to be valuable, accurate, and complete. So when we look at some of the things, for instance, user stories, right? How could you measure them to determine their accuracy and completeness? And so here's that put it another way in terms of the different things that lead to influencing the next work product. If you have user stories, good user stories will affect and influence the next step, which would be acceptance criteria. And if you don't have good acceptance criteria, those affect your test cases. And if you don't have good tests and test cases, those will also affect your defects. Now here is a typical defect removal efficiency pie chart. And so this is the end result, right? So this is typically what a lot of folks may look at when you're looking at your end result. Here's another one, right? Velocity. Velocity, like I said, is the end result, the doctor visit. Oh, we got this many story points done, basically. And like I said, there are other things to measure besides velocity and number of defects. So 3 things I'd like to bring forward and have you think about in terms of time, connecting things together, and tracking quality at the intermediate steps. time is a big word, right? So there's many aspects of time. There's time to get stuff done. There's overtime, meaning it took too long, or overtime meaning you had to work overtime, right? Different concepts of overtime even. Of course, there's always not enough time. And then sometimes there's information or data that you would collect as a point in time or over time in terms of like a trend, right? The second thing there is connecting things together. And that's kind of what the concept that I've been talking about continuously in terms of one thing leading to the next and one work product quality affecting the quality of the next work product and tracking that quality in intermediate steps as you go along. So for understanding a user story and thinking about the quality of a user story, a lot of the things you might want to think about are how long did it take? How long did it take relative to other things? So for instance, if you spend, say half an hour, develop half of labor hour working on a user story, but then you spend 10 hours developing that user story or 20 hours developing that user story and 40 hours testing and fixing defects with that user story, that may lead you to believe that some of your proportions are off, right? So I'd invite you to take a look at the cause and effect of user stories and their impact later on in terms of measuring the quality of user story, the quality of your development, and the testing that goes along with that user story. Here's an example of connecting things together. And thanks to Cheney for getting this screenshot from a flight reservation system. In terms of, you can see in the yellow, we have a user story, which would be purchasing a ticket, or that's actually an epic, purchasing a ticket. And then you have the user story underneath that epic, which is credit card validation, right? And then you have test cases that go along with that. And so you see FRS2 is the user story. FRS3 is the development task associated with those user stories, breaking the user story down into smaller features, and then test cases that are assigned to those development tasks. So everything here, this kind of shows a flow of how things are connected together in an Agile process. This is actually from one of the plugins that's available with Jira called Synapse RT. Here's an example of being able to look at a user story and the testing activities and being able to understand where time was spent. So if you look at, for example, FRS3, which is a development task, determining whether or not it's a valid bank when a person is paying for their ticket in a flight reservation system. You can see that there's an estimated time remaining and the time spent. So they were able to get this done in an hour or 1 day beforehand or 1 day less labor. And then you can see also the tests, FRS 31 in green. Those are tests within a sprint, and they expected to spend 2 labor weeks on that, and they had 1 extra labor day in terms of extra time that they didn't use for testing. Now, another thing to look at is FRS2. So FRS2, like we said before, was a user story, and a user story involves credit card validation. And So in this instance, we're actually tracking the time that it takes to do a user story, the time that it takes to write down all the details of the user story, the acceptance criteria, and so on. And in this case, they estimated 1 week, and it took them only 4 days. And so what I think it's really interesting to look at is the proportions of time that are spent on different things associated with one user story, right? So like I was mentioning before, if you have a user story that you didn't spend a lot of time on, what you'll find is there's a direct correlation in terms of the development and testing time later on. Because if some things are not clear, then you're going to have problems, right? So next I'd like to go over some defect type metrics that are outside of just counting defects by themselves. So let's get into this here. Time to close a defect. So here's a chart on the defect average age in the last 30 days. So what kinds of things does this tell you in terms of defect average age climbing up as time is going on? And just like, if you're a doctor and you're reading somebody's measurements, what kinds of things would you gather from looking at this? And so when I think about it in terms of interpreting this chart and trying to understand what's going on here, if the defect age is going up over time, so what does that mean? Well, of course, I guess that means we're spending less time fixing defects, right? Because they're aging and getting old. It could be, that the defect types, maybe we're finding some little tiny defects that don't really matter. So I'd have to look at my defect priorities and talk to my testers perhaps on understanding that, or possibly I may want to do a more granular chart on priority 1 defects, right, rather than looking at all defects. I also may want to look at the areas that defects are found. So the point I'm trying to get across is that one chart cannot really tell you the whole story, just like one measurement in your body can't tell you the whole story. And sometimes you may need to go back and look again. I remember a few years ago, my wife had, they said that she had something wrong with her thyroid, and they wanted to put her on medication to take for her thyroid. And I said, wait a minute here. Let's wait a week and do the test again. And lo and behold, we'd waited a week and did the test again, and everything seemed normal. And I was just thinking to myself, geez, I just prevented her from getting on thyroid medication from asking to take the test again. And so for any metric that you look at, it's important to look deeper and even do it again. So I'd like to emphasize that in terms of defects as well. And so here's a defect time tracking report. So, in terms of the age, right? So you need to look deeper than the age and look at the time that's actually spent on some of these defects and why there is so much time. So in the end, if you look at the earlier chart, it showed that, oh, well, the defects aging is going up. It's taking a lot longer to fix them. Well, why? Right? So let's look at each of the individual defects and really dig down to understand why things are happening. And so if you're able to look deeper at why things are happening, and then also look at your user stories that are associated with the defects, right? So remember, everything is linked together. One thing is leading to the cause of another. If you do that, then you can see that these defects are actually related to user stories that are not complete. Another thing to look at is defect trends open and close, and let's look at that here. And what are the kinds of things that you could surmise or guess from this chart, right? So this chart shows that testers are finding defects. The red ones, it's going down, and things are getting fixed. Those are good things, right? But what would be the things that you could look at deeper in terms of interpreting this chart? Well, if defects are not being found, does that mean there are no defects to be found? How much time is being spent on testing, right? Maybe my folks that usually do testing are doing something else. So it's important, like I said, to really dig deeper in terms of this. Maybe you had a sprint that didn't have a lot of time for new features and you were busy fixing defects, right? So it's important to dig a little deeper. Here's another way of analyzing this data in terms of defects fixed versus total during the period, or defects for a particular version, so that you can really look at different versions. Different versions will have different amount of defects, and you would want to examine why. Here's one that is really near and dear to my heart, as I've worked with a lot of companies on understanding and developing better user stories as a route to preventing defects. And here's a chart on troubled defects, right? So unresolved defects per requirement. So if you were able to look at the defects associated with requirements by requirement, then it's easy for you to pick out what requirements have trouble and really look at those requirements and try to understand how to make better requirements and develop requirements that are easier to, or write down requirements and document requirements that are easier to develop, right? So you can see in this particular instance that FRS 6 and 10, where they have some unresolved defects, but I think what's really interesting is the percentage of unresolved versus resolved defects for these earlier requirements, and really trying to see why they're unresolved, right? So if you were to look at those different defects and then click on those bars and understand the ones that are unresolved, then you could understand what happened to the requirement. Okay, so defect areas in the software, I've brought this up before in terms of different areas of your software. Here's an example of being able to categorize defects by module, right? So in this way, you can actually pick out areas of the software that are having problems, and areas of the software that have problems usually have issues in the user stories. So just like I said, in terms of sleep affecting just about everything. And, when I start, during the pandemic, you really start thinking a lot about things and spending a lot of times alone in the garden. And I was thinking about my sleep, and I started sleeping more because I really wanted to emphasize that part of my health. And actually, I naturally lost 8 pounds from sleeping more because it affected everything. It's really interesting that if you sleep a lot, then you can exercise more because you're more rested. And all of these things lead to each other. So looking at this, for example, when I look at the things that are having problems, I would really look at the configuration module, not only just the defects in there, but really look carefully at the user stories. In terms of my analogy, I would really look carefully at the sleep part of the configuration. Here's another look at that in terms of the problems that we have in configuration in terms of the versions. And you can see it looks like the configuration errors or defects are going down. That's a good thing. On the other side, you can see that the defects in other modules are going up. So just something to pay attention to over time, like I was mentioning. So let's unpack what we learned today. Like I said, Agile, thinking about over is not equal to none, right? And in terms of defects and velocity, those are good ones, but they're end metrics, they're end results. And so what I'd like you to encourage you today to think about is the work products, the things that happen before those metrics that you can measure, and pick out a few of those and work on those and be open to changing not only your ways that you develop work products to increase quality, but actually changing the metrics that you focus on as well. Here's another graph that I'd like to just close with, because I think it's really, really important in understanding that one thing leads to the next. And I'll close with this slide here. I actually transposed this into sleeping, exercising, eating, and lifestyle, and really taking control of your own body and your intermediate work products that you do in your life that really affect your health. It's really really focusing on my sleep has really had a big impact on everything, in terms of even memory and working, exercise, everything. So I'd like to close with that. We're open for Q&A now. I'm sure that Nancy or you can find me on LinkedIn as well as my company and so on. So Nancy, do we have any things to share?
Yeah, we do have a question. The question is, what are your thoughts on metrics that capture environment readiness and stability? Metrics on environment readiness and stability.
Right. Well, environment readiness, I guess you're talking about test environment or development environment, or a production environment. I guess the stability of each of these environments is really important. And so for the test environment, for instance, I would think that one of the things that would measure the stability would be the data that you have in there, right? In the changing of the data, measuring the amount of change in data is really important. So I don't know. I'm sure there's some database people that can really understand that a little bit deeper in terms of measuring the database volatility and change. Same with requirements as well. I hope that
Is the person that asked that question, if you would like to add into it, just can they unmute their microphones, Phil?
yeah.
Do they have that capability?
Let me see. Yeah. Who?
Okay.
I guess I have to see who asked the question so I can allow them to talk.
It was anonymous, so sorry, you can't allow them to talk.
Okay. Oh,
Okay.
a secret
We do.
admirer. Okay.
Yeah, we do have another one. What tools / software are your measurements captured with? What tools or software are you using to capture your metrics?
Okay. Well, we use Jira to capture these metrics. So one of the things that I didn't emphasize, didn't talk about too much, was that, and I didn't want to have the talk be about Jira, right? Because some folks don't use Jira. But Jira, if there are many plugins inside Jira that will enable you to collect these metrics. And one of them that we use in our company is called Synapse RT. So Scott is raising his hand, so maybe Scott, did you have a question?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you, Scott.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, so one of the things that that we encounter is a lot of environment outages or things that, you know, basically can minimize the amount of time that a test team spends, reviewing stories, testing stories, and so on. So, you know, we've come up with some of our own metrics, to measure outages and so on. I just was curious if in your experience, if you've got any suggestions or recommendations or seen that same kind of issues in things that you've worked on.
Yeah, so in terms of outages, I'm not quite sure what you mean by an outage. Like, the total environment just crashes and goes down?
Correct. Where the application doesn't function because of a back-end process or something like that. We encounter two of them. We encounter the full outage where you can't really use the application whatsoever because of a back-end issue, or within the application, there are certain functions that are controlled by certain back-end processes. And so I've devised certain metrics to try to capture something like that. To measure, what is the impact of the outage compared to what we're working on for a particular release.
Well, I would think that the measurements that you're taking, though, are end result measurements, though, right? In terms of you're measuring how often things go down and what the effect of that is.
Correct.
And so, I think you mentioned earlier that some kind of back end process doesn't work, and so I would really look at those back end processes and work backwards from those back end processes and measuring. How could you measure the health of those back end processes?
Yeah.
That would be
great. That would be great.
That would be better if you were to really understand the back end process a little bit deeper and figure out, if you were, I guess you have system administrators, right? And particularly which back end processes have problems.
Yeah.
I would dig deeper into those particular back end processes and what would be the measurements that would apply to those back end processes. I'm sure they have some things, database calls inside those processes, right? And understanding just one level deeper within those processes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure. All right.
Are there any other questions?
Well, that was an interesting one. Thanks, Scott.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Well, we're almost down to we already took an hour almost already.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if there are not any other questions, I want to thank Phil for doing this webinar for CQAA. And Phil, if you would send a copy of your slides over, we'll get them posted to our website. And just a reminder again that our next webinar is April 21st. Mike Kaufman is going to be talking about emotional intelligence and how it affects our work. So looking forward to seeing you next month and at future CQAA webinars. So once again, thanks, Phil. It's always great getting a chance to interact with you. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.